Well, kia ora, and welcome to a mini hoon on the kaka to Lanny Wong, who is a pharmacist from Mangawhai with the Independent Community Pharmacists Group. Lanny, lovely to have you on the hoon.
Good, I've been it. It's always lovely to chat.
Yeah. So there's been some news in the world of pharmacies that's come sort of trickling out of government. Can you tell us what's going on here?
Yeah, so a couple of days ago, pharmacists found out that pharmacy will be deregulated. So this means that pharmacy are no longer needed to be owned by pharmacists. It means, yeah, pretty much means anyone can own a pharmacy if you've got enough capital. So it means, every supermarket can have pharmacy in there. It means, yeah, potentially corner dairies can have pharmacy in there too. So it no longer needs to have majority ownership by a pharmacist.
Yeah, just to reinforce that for people who don't know,
Mm.
how is a pharmacy different from a clothes shop or something like that in terms of who's behind the counter and who can own the business?
Mm. Yeah, so pharmacy is actually a regulated facility. We hold license from MedSafe to dispense medicine, and it's a licensed premises. And most pharmacy are owned by pharmacists. So, that pharmacy operate under the Medicine Act, the Medicine Regulation. We operate under, the Patient's Code of Rights and our Code of Ethics. And pharmacists are governed by. So there's a lot of law that govern what we do in a pharmacy and the activity that happen in pharmacy. That's why we're different from a retail, from a vitamin shop, if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, so why is that needed? Whenever I get drugs, they always seem to work, and the drugs are regulated. So why does a pharmacist need to get involved? Shouldn't they just sort of dole it out and move on?
Yeah, I think this is a common misunderstanding. So, pharmacists actually provide clinical care. So when you go into a pharmacy, you have the right to receive the care that you request for. So you have the right to understand your medicine, and that's why pharmacy are usually run by pharmacists, and pharmacists always have to be present in a pharmacy to be able to provide patient with that care. And the pharmacist is actually a health professional that you can see every day, anytime, for free.
And so why is it necessary that the pharmacist, who's the health professional,
Mm.
who's directly dealing with the person who's coming in the door, why under the current situation is it necessary for
Mm.
them to own the business? Why couldn't they just be an employee like anyone else?
Yeah, I think yeah, this is the bit that's challenging to explain. But I guess ICPG recently had a case with Te Whatu Ora um, and MetSafe when we challenged the term effective control. So what does it mean to have effective control of a company? So the High Court actually ruled that to have effective control, you have to have meaningful business and financial control of a company. So that's what the legislation say. And so in practice, why is that important? So I'm a pharmacy owner, so I own Mangawhai Pharmacy. So the direction of my business, I get to call the shot, if you like. So if I choose to provide certain type of service, even though it's not a big money making spin, I would do that because I can see there's a need for my community. I can give you an example. For example, the Te Whatu Ora contacted me recently to maybe look at piloting some rheumatic fever screening in my practice. So that's not going to make a lot of money. That is something that I do because I want to have a good relationship with my local Te Whatu Ora representative, and there's clearly they've identified a need in my community, so that will be something I will partner with Te Whatu Ora to provide. Um, I guess if a pharmacist is no longer in effective control of a company, then decision like that can become quite challenging to make when it's not churning out the profit or the margin that you desire.
Because there might be
Mm,
some who'd say, gee, all these little pharmacies operating at small scale, the way to get efficiency and to get prices down and to allow, pharmacy groups, big corporates to be able to, get bulk buying advantages and be able to
mm,
improve their systems is to have a hub and spoke type model, a big corporate with a centralized
mm,
head office. And maybe that's where your your pharmacists, and they just dole it out down the line to the spoke, if you like. Why not?
mm.
What's wrong with that model?
Yeah, no, that model have definitely been explored, and it's certainly a model that exists overseas as well. So, yeah, so New Zealand's definitely have looked very closely at this model, and it's something that you know some pharmacists have explored with the likes of Zoom Pharmacy and Pill Drop. So they're like an online pharmacy. However, at the moment, the challenge with that is actually our legislation. So nobody can decide who holds responsibility for that medicine. And also our funding model. That's another thing. Pharmacists are still not remunerated for our clinical expertise. We are still being paid to count pills, and the more pills you can fast, the faster you can do it, the more money you can make. So that is still how pharmacy make their money, if you like. So that's why the hub and spoke model hasn't happened. And yeah, interesting you asked that, Bernard. So the hub and spoke model actually requires some significant law changes. So with any type of significant law changes that involve medicine, pharmacists should be the center of it. So that's why the deregulation of pharmacy. So when pharmacists no longer have effective control of a pharmacy, it means we no longer call the shot when the time comes for us to have this type of serious conversation. So for a hub and spoke model to work, obviously it has to work not just legislatively but financially as well. When pharmacists no longer have a business and financial control of a pharmacy, um, it means corporate have the call, they get to call the shot on how a legislation should be written. I can probably give you some overseas example. There are some hub and spoke model that work quite well, but there are also some hub and spoke model that works questionably, if you like. Like for example, in Taiwan, there's pharmacy is deregulated there. So there's plenty of hub and spoke model where you have a hub in a faraway area, and then your local place might just have a shop, but there's no pharmacists in there. So their legislation have allowed their medicine to be distributed that way without a supervision of a health professional. It's just a shop. So I guess, in New Zealand, we just need to ask ourselves, what level are we comfortable with? Um, so when pharmacists no longer have effective control of a pharmacy, it makes that sort of discussion really hard because at the moment that is the safeguard is that pharmacists do have effective control of a pharmacy. So we call the shot on how the business should be run. And often it may not be the highest margin because safety and clinical care is also very important in a pharmacist's day-to-day practice, and that may not necessarily be the case when the decisions made by a corporate manager or a corporate executive.
Can you give us some examples of how one of those hub and spoke models, or how effectively taking away ownership from the dispensing pharmacist might change the incentives about, what types of drugs, how many drugs are
Mm,
used, whether a drug is prescribed or delivered at all, because in some cases more drugs is not a good thing, or a different type of treatment instead of a drug might be better,
yeah,
although not as lucrative for the pharmacist.
yeah. In some ways, New Zealand's quite safe from that because we have a farm funding model. However, the overseas evidence definitely show in deregulated environment, for example, the US. Your listener might recall the oxycodone crisis that they had in the US, and that's precisely the type of risk that can happen when deregulation happen, when profit basically is more important than care. That's exactly the type of risk that we're opening ourselves to when we deregulate pharmacy, when financial decision no longer sits with pharmacists, but sits with the corporate board.
Yeah, because I recall during COVID, I was sort of
Mm,
surprised and pleased that just about every pharmacist in the country turned
mm,
themselves into a bit like a doctor's studio overnight to deliver vaccinations and to help with the whole testing process. It seemed to me
mm,
that they had a very close relationship with Health NZ and felt not only obliged, but connected in a way that meant that they could suddenly all become places where you could get vaccinations. Um,
mm,
I wonder whether that would be possible if you'd moved to a situation where the person behind the counter wasn't um, an actual regulated and,
mm.
accountable health professional.
Yeah, Bennett, one of the reason that's cited by the cabinet paper is that it will they say deregulation will actually bring about innovation. So the example that you gave there, traditionally in pharmacy, innovations actually come from independent pharmacy. It come from local projects. It come from the pharmacists working in conjunction with their community. So I guess, COVID's one example. So it's, when COVID vaccine first get rolled out, it was in the, big vaccination center hub. And I guess if I use my pharmacy as an example, is that my patient at the time, they have to travel an hour to Whangarei or they have to cross the border down to Auckland. At the time I recognized there's a need for my community. So I can actually adjust my business very quickly to adapt to that new way of working. Um, I guess, if my pharmacy is a big corporate, I'll probably have to ring a HQ to say, hey, can I do this, and wait for the resources to come. So that's probably one constraint if a pharmacy become corporatized. Um, and the other thing, going back to innovation, is a lot of things that pharmacy have done, that a lot of the innovation that's happened in pharmacy, for example, vaccination. Now you can go into most pharmacy and they'll be able to provide you with your flu vaccine. The first pharmacy or pharmacist that are able to do that is an independent pharmacy in Hamilton. So it's driven by local initiative, by local cooperation with their local health professional. So innovation actually comes from independent pharmacy, not corporate actually. So that's actually untrue, because if you talk to anyone in our sector, and we will be able to point out someone that has innovated um, some services that really transform how pharmacists practice.
And what about the argument that this will,
Mm,
allow economies of scale, that you'd had an infusion of investment as
mm,
there's a rush to become the biggest in the market.
mm.
This would provide efficiencies that would be passed on to customers in the form of lower prices.
Mm. There's probably some truth to that. I think, I think I'm thinking probably outside of pharmacy for this. Like anything, this is probably a business with my business hat on, like anything, when you're struggling, when you're fighting for market share, there will always be innovation, price dropping, and all that sort of thing. But in the short term, there might be that type of benefit. But I think, everyone in Aotearoa will probably understand in the long term, once a monopoly or duopoly situation that has been established, prices go back up, and services drop. So I think, pharmacy is very likely to follow a similar type of trend.
And has that happened overseas where markets have been deregulated?
Yeah, actually. So, yeah, if we look at the UK as an example, so, they've got a lot of pharmacy closure at the moment. I can't remember the exact number, but certainly in their rural area is closing by the hundreds every year. So it's no longer sustainable to run rural pharmacy, and that's the case in New Zealand as well. Like it's very hard to sustain a rural pharmacy, and that's usually the rural pharmacy that will shut. Up in Northland, rural white pharmacy have shut, so that's gone. Hokianga is a very remote area, so they're down to one pharmacy, Kaikoi. So we'll see a lot more of that, and it's not because you know, it, it's not because there's not a need in that area. It's actually because we couldn't staff it. There's workforce issue as well. New Zealand's got the lowest number of pharmacists compared to the rest of the OECD. Um, yeah,
Per
yeah, we're
capita.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, per capita. So so that's a problem that hasn't been resolved either. And
Mm.
mm,
So the other thing is that this sounds like a fairly major change in a big part of our health
mm,
system, let alone our economy. And we found out about it sort of through the back door of a weird little announcement about a medical products bill, because as you suggest here,
mm,
this would require significant changes to a bunch of bits of legislation.
mhm.
What did you think of the whole sort of process here in terms of how the government is making a decision and not really announcing it and planning to put it into legislation next year? What did you think of the process?
Oh, to be honest, Bernard, like I'm a pharmacist, so I really do not understand how things get legislated at all. Some of your listeners might be able to answer that question better, but certainly for pharmacy, for a pharmacist like myself, it came as a huge surprise. Like our sector hasn't, our sector constantly discuss different issues that we face, but deregulation certainly wasn't one of those. And as far as member of ICPG is that we the High Court have ruled pharmacists should have effective control of a pharmacy. That means having business and financial control of a pharmacy. So that's the High Court ruling. So to hear the minister announcing that they want to deregulate pharmacy seemed questionable, in my opinion. However, I'm not an expert in legislation process, so I'll let other experts decide what that means.
Yeah, I mean, normally in
Yeah.
such a big structural change that affects lots of different parts of the economy and parts of the health system, that requires or usually involves a consultation process. And
Mm,
although there will be, a testing of the proposals in a select committee process, often for something this big, it goes through a proper consultation beforehand. To be honest,
mm,
this is not this isn't this minister's first rodeo. Casey Costello has made changes to things without consulting the industry, although she has consulted a
mm,
few particular industry groups or lobbyists and said to the public that that's enough. How do you think this
mm.
one has come out of the blue like this? I mean, why is there a burning platform for this that needs to be solved?
Um, I'm not sure if I should be naming names, Bernard. I think anyone can talk to their pharmacist. They might have a theory, but unfortunately, I am guided by the Code of Ethics and the HPCA Act, and I'm not allowed to talk about this.
That's all
Yeah.
right. I shall do some digging and find out a bit more. Lanny Wong, who has a pharmacy in Mangawhai and is a spokesperson for the Independent Community Pharmacists Group here on a mini hoon. Thank you very much, Lanny, for coming on to the Kaka.
Thanks, Bernard. Nice to chat.